All right, welcome back. Stupid versus the spread. We're going to do a recap of all the New Year's Six bowls, which is very exciting. All those were pretty good. Some of them were intense. Cotton Bowl, we'll cover it. We'll talk about it, and then we'll give discussion a little bit about what we saw during the semifinal playoff games, and then we'll talk about foresight and what we think is in the future for TCU and Georgia as they continue their runs and try to win a championship at the national title level. So we'll start off. We'll do the Sugar Bowl, so Alabama, Kansas State. Um, Alabama looked pretty dominant. I wod say Kansas State obviously still a very good season. I just it's still Alabama. I think if we had an expanded college football playoff, and I don't know if you disagree, Mike, but we probably see Alabama making a run at the finals. Whether they would get there or not, I would almost assuredly expect to see them in the semifinal game. Um, I think some of the kinks that they had earlier in the season, they've kind of worked out. I think next year we'll see Alabama as probably a perennial contender for the championship, just with the amount of talent they have that they kind of failed on this year. I don't know if you saw anything different or you disagreed a little bit there.
Well, I think it's the quarter. I guess the wide receivers and the playmakers for Alabama played with significantly less pressure in this game because I think
Very true.
um, I think that most people kind of blame them for Alabama's failures this year, and there weren't a whole lot of expectations going in this game, and then I thought that they played pretty well. They got open. I know Bryce Young had some. I mean, he did Bryce Young things, and he's going to keep doing Bryce Young things in the NFL. I think
Yeah,
we'll see.
Bryce Young went 15 completions in 21 attempts, 321 yards, 5 touchdowns.
Yeah,
That I mean, just
yeah.
what else are
He
you gonna say?
had he hit a touchdown drive in the first quarter where he stepped up into a clean pocket and looked off two defenders and threw one to the back of the end zone. That I was just like, that's an NFL play that no other quarterback in this draft class can make. And
Agreed.
he's that good. He will be that good.
He'll be
Um,
1-1 this year.
Yeah, exactly.
I
And
don't
it's
think
not.
there's really
It
any
shouldn't even be a question. It should like the Houston Texans should hand that draft card in now.
before
Don't
they
go through the
overthink it.
combine.
Yeah,
Yeah, don't go through the combine. Don't go through anything. Hand the draft card in right now. So yeah, I mean, I think he's even more of a shoo-in than Trevor Lawrence was, and it's yeah. I mean, Alabama looked good. I think what holds them back next year, I think, is what they do with the quarterback situation. They'll probably start another five-star, redshirt freshman Bryce Young sort of player, but I don't think. They have a couple guys. I know Eli Holstein's coming in. I know they have some other kids, but I don't know that they have the kind of prospect that Bryce Young was coming out of California to fill his shoes. So we'll see. Yeah, I mean, they're always going to be good with the talent they have, but if they can't, I think upgrade at the skill positions because it still is a need. Especially with a new quarterback coming into the fold, you're never guaranteed to get a Heisman winner just
correct.
coming out of nowhere. Um, so that'll be interesting for Alabama this offseason, how they reload on the outside. Can they maintain the continuity in the offensive line that'll allow them to run the football more effectively? Do they have the running backs behind Jameer Gibbs, who's also going to the NFL? So I think they've got more questions to answer on offense. Defense, they always have dudes. So we'll see. I know they lose Will Anderson. They'll probably lose Brian Branch, but they always reload. So
Yeah,
uh,
and I mean, if you look at like what the storyline, if there's a reason Kansas State performed so poorly, it really was just a vast difference in passing game. Will Howard had no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 18 for 35, 200 yards, 210 yards, right? And Alabama, on the other hand, is air
yeah,
raiding the ball out for part of that game, and making some pretty incredible throws, pretty impressive, and to their credit to the receiving court as well. But final 45, Alabama. Kansas State 20. So I mean, Alabama covered this by like leaps and bounds. So really not much to say. I mean, I think everyone kind of expected Alabama to win. I think there were a few that thought Kansas State would really pull it out, but this was kind of a butt whooping, if you would.
yeah. I think it also speaks to the way that the kind of guys Nick Saban is able to filter through, and I think
Yeah,
that's where he has an edge because I don't think you would have seen and you haven't seen a lot of guys who knew they were going pro announce they were going pro on on Sunday. or Saturday. That game was Saturday. They
Yes.
announced they were going pro on Saturday, and they still went out there and played like that, and played that well.
Yeah.
And so that kind of, I think that Nick Saban deserves some credit there for. I mean, it's easy to say go get Bryce Young, go get Will Anderson. They were two of the top five players in their class, I believe. But more than that, I think he has an ability to draw guys that who will he knows are going to play hard for him every
Hmm.
game, no matter what. So I think another tip of the cap to the old ball coach.
Yeah, and we'll see how Alabama shapes up. We got a lot of postseason stuff to talk about. Another game that was kind of an ass kicking. LSU 63, Purdue Boilermakers 7. Um, this was, I would say, the Citrus Bowl was probably the least entertaining of these bowls that we're talking about here. It it was from start to finish LSU all the way. Purdue didn't look like they wanted to be out there. I know that sounds mean, but they put three different guys at quarterback at one point, and all three threw an interception. LSU didn't just throw the ball with a bunch of guys. They also ran. I think like they had like 4 running touchdowns or something. So that they had an established running game, established passing game, and Purdue could just for really 60 minutes just not stop LSU. There really, to me, there wasn't a takeaway other than I'm excited to see if LSU next year is more of a contender than they were this year with Chip Kelly kind of having, or I'm sorry, not Chip Kelly,
Brian Kelly.
Brian Kelly having time to kind of develop these guys throughout the year. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't know if you had anything on the Citrus Bowl. I really didn't think there was much there.
No, I think I think once LSU gets like because they once they get not another Joe Burrow but another dynamic quarterback, I would say look out.
Yeah, yeah.
Excuse me.
We'll touch on a non New Year's Six bowl, Mississippi State, Illinois. I would argue probably one of the more miraculous covers.
Ever?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe aside from the Cotton Bowl, which we'll talk about here in a second, but Mississippi State is, I think they were what 3.5 point favorites, and they were up by 2. So the game's coming to its conclusion. No
No,
time left on the.
wasn't it the total?
No, the under hit on this one.
Never mind. Yes, I'm thinking of another game. But
So
yeah,
Mississippi State wasn't covering. Illinois does the old, lateral play to try and score a touchdown at the end of the game because they didn't have enough time to. They had no timeouts left. There was only 7 seconds, so they ran the lateral play, and they got far down the field. I think they got to
mhm.
like their opponent's 40 or 30. Like it almost looked like Illinois was going to pull it off, and then one backwards pass, like a lateral, basically just intercepted by Mississippi State, taken all the way to the house on the opposite end. It was a crazy, crazy outcome for the end of the game. Now, granted, Mississippi State was probably going to win that as long as they stopped Illinois, but the fact that
Yeah,
they covered a 3.5 point spread, they
yeah.
were only
That's.
winning by 2 when they scored the touchdown. It was crazy.
I mean, that's why you gamble. That's up there with like Bowling Green, Kentucky, or the Bowling
Miami,
Green
yeah, Miami
Toledo.
Miracle,
Yeah, like all
App
it's
State from this year with the Hail Mary.
yeah. I mean, just in terms of plays that meant absolutely nothing for the scoreline, but totally changed the
The
gambling
outcome
outcome.
of the game.
It's up there in history. I mean, it's unbelievable. I don't know how you could. I mean, it's hard to describe that I just say that's why college football gambling is the best because things like that can happen.
Yeah, yeah, it was pretty incredible. All right, so we'll move on. I think we just wanted to mention those two of those blowouts. One was just kind of fun for the gambling aspect. Rose Bowl. Rose Bowl was good for about the first half of the game, and then unfortunately Cam Rising gets hurt. And was it Kyle Whittingham who stepped in?
No, Kyle Whittingham is the coach. I forget
Oh,
what
I'm
that
sorry.
coach's name is, but
Um, I'll look it up here in a second. But so basically, the Utah Utes, as soon as Cam Rising gets injured, they were basically it looked like it was developing into uh, a relative shootout. I would say. I don't know if you agree with that, but then as soon as Cam Rising gets hurt, um, Penn State pulls away by 3 touchdowns. Utah comes back, scores a final garbage time ending touchdown. But yeah, kind of shitty end for an otherwise good Utah season. Obviously, the this interestingly enough, this is the last year that a Pac-12 team is guaranteed to get to the Rose Bowl. Up until this year, they were, I think, contractually obligated to put in a Pac-12 team.
Yeah, I think it's Pac
Um,
12 or Big Ten and Pac 12.
yeah, Bryson Brines. He didn't look. He didn't play terrible. He was 10 for 19, 120 yards, and one TD, one interception. Not awful stats, but Penn State was able to put on the gas when their star quarterback when the other team's star quarterback got hurt, and it got away from Utah kind of towards the end, which was sad to see because I was rooting for Utah, but I think I'm interested to see if Cam Rising comes back. I don't know if that he's a junior and he hasn't declared for the draft, so I think he is coming back.
Hmm.
Obviously, he has a decision to make in that aspect. Um, but I think he's a good quarterback. I think he'll probably come back next year for Utah. I don't think he's going to the transfer portal. I think
Yeah,
Utah is still going to be a contender for next year. So
yeah. I mean, it was weird because that game was. It seemed like Utah was sort of hanging on, and then
yeah,
Penn State was building momentum, and then he gets hurt, and it sort of opened the floodgates. And you need your defense to step up in the spot like that, and you give up 285 plus yard touchdowns, and Penn State really just broke the game open at that point. So, yeah, it's a shame because you want to see Rising have a chance there to sort of keep them in that game. It seemed like he was sort of willing them into the game. Penn State in the second half started loading the box to defend the run, and they really put the game on Cam Rising's shoulders, and he was delivering
yeah,
up until that point. So, I mean, it sucks. As long as he's healthy, you figure he'll come back. Utah will have a good senior laden team. You expect so. Um, yeah, I mean, it's disappointing for Utah. I think it's a good win for Penn State. It'll help them build momentum, recruiting, and as Drew Aller comes in next year, they have some. They're getting talent in the transfer portal. They have some really young talent on offense. So I think Penn State could be an really interesting team.
yeah.
Next year.
I think they're poised. I would agree with you. I think they're poised with a couple maybe additions on defense, maybe one or two skill positions here and there on offense. I could see them very much being a contender as we go late into the season next year. And they didn't. I wouldn't say Penn State did poorly at all. I think if you walk away, with a Rose Bowl win on a New Year's Six game, like it's hard to argue he had a bad season.
No,
I
I
think they kind of regret that Ohio State game a little bit. I think looking back on it, maybe they're thinking, "Oh, we could have had that if one or two things had broken our way." Um, but
yeah, I
other
think
than that, Penn State played fantastic. I mean, Michigan too. They kind of got crushed by Michigan, though. I think
yeah,
they had a better
and
chance of beating Ohio State.
I think that the program is gonna feel a sense of pressure from the fan base next year to because they are sort of stagnating at a 10-2 year and a good bowl game. But if every year you're losing to Michigan and Ohio State every single year consistently and not really staying on the same field with them, you can only stay in that area for so long, especially with what they're paying James Franklin and the way he's recruiting and what they're expecting him to do. That's not going to fly with the fan base for more than a couple years. So I
Right.
think that yes, they're going to be an exciting young team, but I think they're going to have a lot of pressure going into next season to knock off one of those big boys. I think that Michigan game specifically, if both teams get there undefeated, I think we'll have a lot of pressure for James Franklin and for Drew Aller, who's going to be a 5-star going up against a 5-star in JJ McCarthy, who we'll get to, and what that game could mean for the Penn State program because they'll have
Yeah.
it at home. They'll have it at home again. Um, so it's going to be interesting next year for Penn State because I think they'll be a better team than they were this year, but they're also going to have much more pressure next year.
I would 100% concur with that. Okay, last New Year's Six Bowl, not including the semifinals that we'll talk about right after. The Cotton Bowl. So if you didn't see it, I was there and I could tell you all about it. So out of I don't know when they started recording for the stat, but out of 1,600 games played by FBS teams where one team was down by 15 plus points in less than 5 minutes. The record was like 1 and 16,000, and Tulane made it 2 and 16,000. So if you didn't see the game, Tulane, USC in Dallas. So USC opens up scoring twice, 2 touchdowns. They started with the ball. They got a touchdown. Tulane just had to punt it away on their first offensive drive. USC scores another touchdown. Tulane comes back and is able to score 14. So they make up one 14-point deficit. Game goes on. USC again is up by 14 points. Tulane then again answers, comes back. Then USC goes up for a final time, and they were up by 15 points. Tulane had gone for two, not gotten it, and then done an onside kick, which they'd failed to get, and then USC scored a touchdown. That would be the last time USC scored. So the following events happen. There is like 4.5 minutes left. Tulane runs 2 plays or 3 plays, touchdown, like 90-yard run by our star quarterback or star running back at this point. We'll talk about him in a second. But so they score. They opt not to onside kick, and USC's returner muffs the ball on the 1 yard line, and because he muffed it, it goes out of bounds at the 1 instead of bouncing basically into the end zone. And by the nature of him muffing it, if he had muffed it and it had gone into the end zone, it's just a touchback. He didn't possess the ball to make it a safety, right? So the Tulane defense comes on the field. USC is on the 1 yard line, runs a running play. They get stuffed, but get back to the 1 yard line, and then that second running play that they ran, Tulane gets a safety. So now Tulane's only down 6. There is like a minute of game time left, one timeout. Tulane drives down the field. There are 9 seconds left. They throw a pass in the end zone. So first of all, huge play, gets them all the way down to like the 7 yard line. They call their last timeout, throw a touchdown, end zone, ruled
on a
incomplete.
on a very questionable non-call on a
Yes,
targeting penalty that should have been called.
arguably I would be interested to see what Steve Shaw, who's the national coordinator of football officials, they review a lot of these targeting calls to make sure that it's being correctly called, and there is an adjudication process after the game is over to help improve the crews. I'd be curious as to whether the replay official is not reprimanded, because that's not really how it works, but told like, hey, this should have been targeting, and tell the referee like, hey, this met all the metrics for targeting. I'm curious as to whether or not they would
Yeah, it's hard to
suggest
see
to
how
those
that couldn't
officials.
have been top of the helmet, or because it didn't look. The one thing I'll say is it wasn't intentional, forcible contact to the head and neck area, but it was definitely the crown of the helmet. And to say it
To a
wasn't is
defenseless receiver, so it doesn't have to be like he
they
was kind of going to the ground. It looked like so
Yeah,
he's given
on
that
the
protection.
broadcast, they said he wasn't defenseless anymore because I
Mm,
guess he's turning, which I think is bull. But I think the bigger one that doesn't make any sense is how it wasn't deemed to be the crown of the helmet. It absolutely was the crown of the helmet uh,
yeah, it looked
to
like it. It looked like it
to
to
the
me.
player's helmet, which is a targeting penalty.
So yeah. So anyway, uh, pass is thrown, ruled incomplete. Replay comes in, touchdown. USC would run 2 plays, not get it. Tulane wins the game in an incredible fashion, mostly because of that safety, which gave them the opportunity to just kick a PAT instead of going for two to try and tie it. Uh, Specifically, Spears, the running back for Green Wave, had 4 rushing touchdowns, ran for 200 yards. Kid's going to be a stud in the NFL. I'm very excited to see where he goes. But overall, like an incredible Cotton Bowl game to close out what was a fantastic regular season. And when I say close out, I mean, aside from the Rose Bowl, we also had these 2 playoff games, which we're going to talk about. So we'll start with Michigan TCU. It was the first game of the two. Uh, TCU beats Michigan, upsetting them as 8-point underdogs. Uh, I did not see this coming. I know you had hinted that you thought for sure TCU would cover, so good call on that. Um, who do you think is to blame for? how the Wolverines basically. I, it's not that they gave this game up, right? But they certainly didn't perform to the level that they needed to. Do you who do you what do you think was the turning point in that game? Because I have a very distinct answer.
I I think that there had to have been a sense of this isn't good. This isn't going to be our night. As soon as JJ McCarthy throws his second pick six,
Correct.
I
So
think honestly, I was kind of shocked to see the first one because the one thing he hasn't done is made freshman mistakes.
correct, and he certainly did that
Yeah,
in that game. So what was interesting to me, right? And where I think, and this is going to be the you're going to be like, well, no shit, dummy. But if you look at Max Duggan's stats, they're worse than JJ McCarthy's stats. He threw 14 completions for 225 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. JJ McCarthy threw 20 completions in 34 attempts, 340 yards, 2 and 2. But the difference is that J. McCarthy threw 2 pick sixes, and if I remember correctly, they didn't really return many, get many yards on the return on Max Duggan's interceptions. So like, if you look at how the game went and what happened, Max Duggan certainly didn't play lights out. It wasn't like TCU was on fire. It was two college football plays, right? Two crazy plays, two pick sixes that completely flipped the nature of this game. And I think it really deflated Michigan. I think the first one deflated Michigan a lot. I think
yeah. I think
certainly the
even
second
as early as it was, but the second one, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Horn Frogs keep driving on through this. I mean, I would say miracle season. I think TCU and Tulane probably the two best storylines. Tulane going from 2-10 last year to 12-2 this year, which is the best FBS improvement of any team in the history of college football. And then TCU going from a 5-7 team to now playing in the college football championship. I think they are like truly a Cinderella story. I think it's awesome. But yeah, I feel bad for Michigan. I think they not that you have a look ahead in the semifinal game, but it I think maybe for some, especially the fans, like TCU, you know, uh, basically going up 14-0 in the first quarter, and Michigan having zero answer, and then just playing from behind the rest of the game was really their downfall, right?
Yeah, I
Because
mean,
you can let them you can let them go score, drive down the field, score first, and then just answer. But instead of answering, they throw a pick six, and in that moment, like Michigan looked like crap. You know what
yeah,
I
I mean,
mean?
they drive all the way down the field on the first drive. They get inside the red zone. They don't get it. Turn the ball
They
over on
go
them.
for it, yeah, which was a
Yeah,
stupid decision because if you look at it, like those 3 points really could have mattered in the tail end of the game. They only scored 6 points in the first half of the game. Like
yeah.
that their offense is very much to blame for that poor performance, and you can't go out in what became a shootout only score 6 points in the first half and expect to still be in a game like that. I think they're just
Yeah, just a ton of missed opportunities for Michigan, and I think that's going to be, I think, even more extrapolated as they get further away from this game, because it feels like a sliding doors moment for the Michigan football program, where if they win this game and then they go out and they would have played with a lot of belief against Georgia after the way that Ohio State just played Georgia, assuming the game goes the same way. You don't know whether or not they win the national title game. Obviously, we'll see how this game unfolds, but um, instead of talking about a team that has progressed now 2 consecutive years under Harbaugh, gotten to a national title game, it was something nobody thought they could do. They generate more momentum in recruiting high
mm-hmm.
end talent, and they really put themselves in that conversation with the other programs that have been there year in and year out, and with what they're doing to Ohio State and the momentum that they generated within the Big Ten. Now you look at it as they really missed a chance to do that. And now
Yeah,
the rumors are starting with Harbaugh to the NFL, and can he get back there? And was this the window? And we don't know how it shakes out, but I think that there's a chance that if Michigan sort of slides back to what they were for most of the 2010s, you could go back to this moment, this game, and say that's where it changed. That we were headed in the direction we wanted to be in that game. Those pick sixes, that first drive even are where it all changed, and that's kind of
yeah.
crazy. to say, but you could be 3 years from now if Harbaugh's moved on and Michigan's sort of meddling around in the Big Ten. You could be looking back and saying, "There it is. That's where it happened."
Yeah, and I don't like the decision to not kick that field goal first quarter. As Michigan's driving, I think you take points where you can get points early in the game, and then let the chips fall where they may. Because there was, you make one or two different decisions, it very well could have been a tie game going into overtime for Michigan. I think it was way too early to push the button on fourth and goal situation, try and go for it, especially with how they'd been performing on fourth and short, like up to that point, which was very early on in the game. But they went for it on third and short, didn't get it. They go for it on fourth and short, and don't get it again. It's like, what are you doing? Kick the field goal, take the points. Trust your defense to stop TCU and then drive down the field. And then, unfortunately for Harbaugh and Michigan, they just couldn't do it. And to TCU's credit, they capitalized on turnovers. They capitalized on getting points on the board early. They were pretty consistent scoring wise, right? Like they scored
Yeah.
21 in the
No,
first
they did.
half
They
and
did
30 in the
exactly
second.
what they needed to do. They jumped out early. They were opportunistic. I didn't see them scoring as consistently as they did the entire game and answering the bell when Michigan sort of made their run. Um,
Right.
I thought you figured that would be the where the game would turn around for Michigan, and to TCU's credit, they just never looked back. Which is what we kind of what I was saying they needed to do to win the game was jump out early and hang on and turn it into a nervous game. They did, but it was nervous more for the defense than the offense, and that's how we got over the total instead of under.
Yeah. And so I don't have a problem with how the timeouts were managed at the end of the game. I think actually, if you look back on it, what Harbaugh did gave Michigan an opportunity at the end of the game. But I know a lot of fans were like pissed when it's a minute 30 and the clock's running and you're not burning a timeout yet because it's third and short and you don't want to waste the timeout. I didn't hate that call and that decision making from Harbaugh at all. I thought actually it was really smart despite the pressure of what you'd think you would need to do. But Michigan just doesn't pull it out, and TCU's heading to the final against Georgia, who beautiful transition of my if I do say so myself. So the Peach Bowl, Georgia versus Ohio State. Basically, what happened in the Michigan TCU game where Michigan couldn't come back, the opposite happened where you know Georgia is down what two
10. They're
touchdowns?
dead. They were
Yeah,
down
they looked
10
they looked
with 10 minutes left.
yeah, and they were it's not like they were like dog shit all game, but they certainly were trailing, you know, in the second and third quarters, and it looked as if, especially after that third quarter where Georgia doesn't drive down the field at all and score a single point, you're thinking, okay, maybe Ohio State's pulling away with this. And then in the fourth quarter, Georgia scores 18 points to win the game 42-41. I mean, do you blame the decision making on Ryan Day's part, or do you think Georgia just kind of overwhelmed them at the end of the game?
No,
Because you certainly can't say C.J. Stroud it's his fault, right? He basically had a perfect game: 23 completions, 350 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. Like you couldn't ask for a better game. Stetson Bennett had very similar stats. He had 50 more yards than that, three touchdowns, 1 interception. But I mean, if you're evaluating it on the quarterback play alone, like both teams played exactly the same. Like, and certainly the score reflects that. But Stetson Bennett and C.J. Stroud both played their fucking asses off. I don't agree with some of the decision making that Ohio State made, especially in the second half.
yeah, I do think though. I would say that any credit you have to take away from Ryan Day, you also have to give him for getting something out of this team that nobody, I think, going into this game ever thought was in there.
Correct.
And so I give him a lot of credit for getting that. And you score 42 points against a defense that's been historically dominant, or sorry, 41. You expect to win the game,
Right.
and that's why you hire Jim Knowles, and that's why you have done those things. So, um,
Yeah,
why
and
you made the changes on the defense that you have to go out and win a game like that. I think what you can fault Ryan Day for in the buildup here is that he has not gotten his team to play with that sort of attitude, with that sort of focus, that way the entire season. And then when you have the opportunity to win a game like that, where you need it against competitive comparable talent in a spot like that, and you haven't played like that the entire year. Even really against Notre Dame, they were still the better team talent wise. They came out and got beat up by Michigan. They played mostly they did play teams that were inferior to them all season besides Penn State. And so Penn State is really the only situation that you can go back to and say that's where we pulled it out. That's where we made the plays that made the difference. And even then, that game ended up as a 21-point victory, I think. I think it was 44-21 if my memory serves me correctly. So,
I think that's about right.
um,
Yeah.
so that I mean, that's not real. That wasn't a barn burner. They pulled away with it in the fourth quarter, and to be fair to CJ Stroud, which I have to be because I was the one who was so down on him, he made the plays that he needed to make to put them in a position to win. They just couldn't. They couldn't get the stops they needed. But I think it's more. It speaks more to Georgia's ability to overcome, to know their situation they're in. I think Stetson Bennett deserves so much credit for the way that he basically willed that team back into the game, and in a spot where not many people would have still believed that they had a chance to win that game. He found a way to get them off the turf and get them back into it mentally. And I think that's, say what you want about whether or not he made the all the plays, but he made the plays that got them to believing again that they could win that game. And I think Kirby Smart obviously deserves credit too. So I think it's what champions do. I think a ton of credit goes to Ohio State for finally playing the game that everybody thought they were capable of playing. I think, like I said, the bigger discredit to the program is that they haven't treated the rest of their games that way.
Or
And
at least they haven't performed that way, right? Like
yeah,
they held Georgia. Georgia was 2 for 10 on third down
yeah,
attempts. Like that should win you the game.
mm-hmm.
And if Ohio State plays like this against Michigan, Ohio State, you know,
Probably
steamrolls
wins.
Michigan.
Yeah.
Right. And
So
unfortunately, you fumbled the bag at the fourth quarter. Maybe you got to go into that fourth quarter thinking we got to score a touchdown, right? And they just couldn't do it, couldn't pull it out. And credit to the Bulldogs for coming back in a pretty shocking fashion. Truly, I mean, even when you knew like, oh, it's Georgia, it's really something special to see. Routinely a team come back like that. It's just so impressive, and I give them all the credit in the world.
yeah,
But
and just and to maintain some sort of confidence that they were going to find a way to win that game when
yeah,
nobody thought they did, is really a testament to how good a coach Kirby Smart is.
correct. All right, so the ultimate. I was going to say penultimate, but that wouldn't have been correct. The final the final game of the season, the college football FBS national championship game, Monday, 7:30 Eastern, I believe, 6:30 Central, January 9th. TCU, one loss TCU versus undefeated Georgia. TCU is the line opened at 13.5. It's now down to 12.5, but TCU is still 12.5 point underdogs. The over under is 62.5, and TCU is currently plus 350 on the money line. For because we do this a lot and we cover how the money is looking so far as of this recording, which is the 3rd of January. 93% of the money is on TCU to cover, and 85% of the bet slips is on TCU to cover. Mike, I think we've seen enough from these teams. I don't know that we really need to break down like
Who they are, yeah,
ounce by ounce. I think if you've watched these teams, TCU is truly the scrappiest of underdogs that continuously wins games where they shouldn't, and or people think they shouldn't. Not that to discredit them in any way. And Georgia is you know wasn't the perennial contender coming into the season, but certainly didn't get enough respect at the beginning of the year, coming off a national championship win last year, and now they are almost 2 touchdown favorites in the national championship game. Mike, go ahead. Give me your pick. Give me your logic behind it, and then I'll do the same for mine.
So I am going to take Georgia at whatever this number drops to by roughly, let's say Saturday. I know where the numbers are. I point to this feels like Georgia last year against Alabama, but they didn't slip this time. Just in a game where everybody sort of thought that Georgia was a team that was nearly invincible, that had everything going for it. They go out and play a rather shocking game, really defensively against a high-powered offense, and lose that game. Um, and then they find a way to get themselves back in the right headspace and go out and play a dominant game against Michigan, and then they, obviously avenge their loss to Alabama with the help of Jameson Williams tearing his ACL. But still,
Mm-hmm.
um, I I think that Georgia is the way more talented team in this game. I think that at 14, where the line opened, that's high in a national title game. I think as this number, if it continues to drop, um, it becomes more what it should have looked like to start with, and it may have been bet in the opposite direction had the results unfolded differently on Saturday. So I think Georgia's way more talented. I think that the path to victory for TCU is to do exactly what happened to Michigan, where they get a couple things that go their way at the beginning of the game. They get out to a lead. They're able to have a lot of flexibility on offense. They're not forced to play one dimensional football. It puts the defense in a really tough spot, and it sort of changes the approach for both teams for the game.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I don't think that happens again. I just it's so hard to get that play or to get those key plays at the beginning of a game that change the momentum in such a way that you can get it there. And with the biggest difference to me is the way that Stetson Bennett has played all year, the way that Georgia has played most of their games, but really, in some bigger spots, both last year and earlier this year. I think against Tennessee, I go back to Tennessee. I go back to they dominated somebody else. I'm trying to think of it. I guess you could say LSU in the SEC title game. I think they come out to play this game. They've had some stinkers, and I think what happened on Saturday for Georgia is that they got they took a punch from maybe one of the only few teams that can really match them talent wise, and even take away Georgia's offense versus Ohio State's defense. Ohio State's offense versus Georgia's defense is as good as a talent matchup as you can find in
Mm-hmm.
college football, and one that I think a lot of people thought was going to be the national title game. So you bring that into this game where Georgia is clearly the more talented team. They will not sleep. They're not sleep. Not that they sleptwalk through the college football semifinal, but they are not going to look past this game. They are going to be geared up, playing with their hair on fire for this game. Max Duggan and TCU have had a great season. I think they're a great team. I don't think they'll go down lightly. I don't think that the spread cover will be easy, but I think Georgia ultimately smothers the life out of this game at the end. I think they win by 2 scores. So I think it'll be 2 touchdowns, and I think they ultimately win by 14 points. But I'm gonna wait for that number to come down. Hopefully, it gets somewhere around 10.5, and then take it then. Um, I like Georgia in the spot on the total. I am inclined to take the over at 63.5 right now, just because I do think that Georgia is going to score at least 35, and then if TCU manages to get into the 20s, I think Georgia will keep scoring, and you hope that this game turns into like a 45-31 victory for Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Playing away from it now, I lean the over, but I'm going to see how the money moves later in the week and kind of make a decision from there. I think, though, I will be on the over as well. So my two picks are going to be Georgia minus whatever it drops to by Saturday. I think hopefully that number will be 10.5. I'll take it as low as it is now at 12.5, to be honest. Um, and then I will be taking the over at, let's say, 64.
Okay, I like it. I don't hate that over pick. I I think it's very possible we see both teams get into the 30s. Maybe TCU's held to about 28. Um, but I think in that case that Georgia would be at like 38. So you'd still ostensibly cover that line. I think I'm not going to say it's a lock by any means, but the only way I see the over not hitting in this situation is if TCU gets absolutely dominated on both sides of the ball and just
Yeah,
cannot
and
really
that's
when they're on offense and they just cannot score.
That's my
And
concern. That's my concern with the over is if this game goes the way that I think it will go. If Georgia comes out and punches them right on the nose and they don't get off the mat, I think if TCU is forced to play one dimensional football to take a bunch of shots and to do those things, I think that um, it could be ugly in the sense that TCU could be really limited offensively, and then you probably don't make the number because even if you would need Georgia into the 50s, and it just doesn't seem like they're going to put their foot that much on the gas in the national title game.
Mhm.
But I think the other thing too is the athleticism of Georgia's defense is going to create a lot of problems for TCU's offense. I know they have a good running game, but part of that is Max Duggan. I think he's going to have a real tough time running the ball in this game, and I think that plays a lot in Georgia's favor if they can keep him in the pocket and play athlete on the outside. I know Quentin Johnson's a great wide receiver. I know they have great wide receivers, but you can only hit so many of those shots down the field, and especially against a defense that can really get after the quarterback like Georgia can. I think this game's much different um, than TCU's last game. Like I said, I think TCU having to get out front and play with a lead makes this game makes it another even like smaller coin flip for TCU, and I just don't know how many of those you can keep hitting to win. They've done it coming from behind the entire season. Now they're in a situation where they have to be in front, or it becomes so difficult for them to win this game. And I don't think they could do it twice.
So I disagree with your opinion on the line. I'm going to take TCU plus 12 and a half. I think TCU's defense can give Georgia a run for its money, not maybe in the same respect that Ohio State was able to, but I think TCU, uh, I think they struggled against like a very severe air raid that Michigan put out and still came out on top, mostly because of the aforementioned pick sixes that we talked about. I think in this case, the the, the TCU offense, I think, will be able to somewhat keep pace, at least within 10 points. And I think on defense, you know, for the most part, TCU was able to help contain the TCU the defensive line did very well against a very good Michigan offensive line. I think you see the same thing here with TCU. So I still think we'll see 30 plus points from both teams. I don't know that Georgia pulls away by 2 touchdowns. Maybe a touchdown and field goal, but I think I truly do see TCU as a scrappy underdog keeping pace with Georgia. I thought it opening at 14 or 13 and a half is a little insulting. Really hasn't dipped past 12 and a half so far. Um, I believe in Max Duggan. I think that loss in the championship game, the conference championship game, really like did something where he has some fire in his belly and he's ready to go. I think Georgia wins this game. I really do. I'm not going to sprinkle money line on this, but I very much see TCU covering this game. I think if you are going to see Georgia cover 12 and a half points, it's going to come at the hands of their defense where they completely stifle TCU, and that hasn't happened this year, and I don't see this happening. Regardless of the talent in Georgia, I don't see it happening against TCU, especially with where they are and what game they're playing. I think they're going to come fired up. TCU's defensive coordinator can do a hell of a job scheming. Been following some of his stuff. Like he did a 3-3-5 against Michigan, and it just deflated them. So I very much can see TCU covering here. So I'm going to pick TCU plus 12 and a half. I think they're a scrappy underdog. They have basically everybody that's not Georgia is going to be rooting for TCU anyway. So I'm rooting for TCU. I think they're going to pull out at least a cover. I far fetched to me that they would win this game, but I very much think they will cover the 12 and a half points.
I think I think it's fair. I would be lying to you if I said that I'm given the way that the numbers and the money are going that I'm, like rock solid max unit, sort of confident, but I think that the way this line is moving is a lot of recency bias and not looking at the talent that Ohio State has, the situation that Ohio State was in. Um, and the way that that led them to playing against Georgia. And to me, I just don't know that TCU can replicate that against Georgia. And Ohio State was the only team that we've seen do that to Georgia all year. Um, they've had some close calls, but none of those games have been, you know, because the defense has really had to play against a very, very talented offense. And the only other very, very, very talented offense they played against was Tennessee, and they obliterated them. Granted, that game was at home, and they had a pretty big chip on their shoulder going into that game. It's a rivalry game, so but this is a national title game, and I think that there's a really good chance that Georgia has heard the noise, has heard. Kirby will find any way to motivate this team. He will show
Yeah,
them how that line is moved, and I think people are falling a little too in love with the way that TCU played, and I think it's going to, like I said, I think it's going to be very difficult for them to replicate that performance against a Georgia team that is not only extremely talented, that's more talented than Michigan, but also has a lot more experience, especially in these spots. Um, I
that is
think,
true. That is
yeah,
true. There's, I mean, if you think about it, there's a lot less pressure when you're a senior or junior, and you were literally in the same spot last year.
yeah, and they will know exactly. They will know the exact mindset, the where they need to be going into this game. Stetson Bennett will have the offense ready to go. They have the players on the defensive side of the ball to play with their ears pinned back, and so that's the logic. I do think you're going to know where this game's going almost immediately. Like we said, or like we said about last game. I think TCU is going to have the same sort of approach. They need big plays early in the game. They need to jump out to a lead, and then they need to play with the flexibility that allows them to play with. I think if Georgia is able to get on top early, and I think you're gonna know whether or not you're cashing here based on the first team to take a two-score lead. Um, and that's not very simple logic, but if it's Georgia, you're still right at the number. But I think
Yeah,
for me, if I have Georgia and they're the first team that takes a two-score lead, this game's probably only going in one direction. You're worried about a backdoor, but I think that goes away as Georgia sort of smothers the life out of this game. I think for TCU, obviously, if you go up two scores at the beginning of the game and Georgia's down four against the spread, um, you're in great shape. So
yeah, yeah.
I do think that where this game goes in the first couple quarters and which way the big plays go is going to really dictate how this game plays out against the spread.
I honestly 100% agree with what you just said, and I'm so excited to see what's gonna happen. All right, so that's been our episode. So that's been the entire regular season, to include the previews we did at the beginning of the year. Um, like and subscribe. Tune into the NFL show. Still got a lot of NFL left, which we'll talk about in the other episodes. But we'll start doing some postseason talk less regularly than once a week, I imagine, but still do some postseason talk, and we'll keep up with all the transfer portal, any coaching changes, and then we'll start to give out previews probably around what June, July timeframe when we kind of have a feel for who's on these teams and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but thank you all for watching this year. Like and subscribe, and have a great day.